Hey ladies and gentlemen, Mr. T here again. I know I missed my deadline, but I was sick, don't judge me. So we are here in the new year, the first day of 2017, and we are going to start the year off with our 14th amendment, and it has to do with citizenship plus a lot more. It has to do with a lot. This is actually the longest amendment that has happened to this point. Okay, we have amendments that are longer than this one, but as of like the 14th amendment, so 1 through 14, this is the longest amendment there is. I double checked it because the 12th or the 11th is the 12th is kind of long too. But moving on. So this is our second amendment of our Reconstruction era amendments. We have the 13th, which was the one we did before, anti-slavery, and the next one is the 15th, obviously, which has to do with voting. But this one, the 14th amendment, has to do with citizenship. And we're going to get into it here we're going to get into it here. Now, the 14th Amendment had to do with, a little background is, after the slaves were freed, remember, we just fought the Civil War, the 13th Amendment freed all the slaves in the United States, so slavery was outlawed. We now had this huge problem on our hands. You know, what do we do with these former slaves? Okay, they're no longer slaves, they're free, but are they citizens? A lot of people in the South said no, because there was this thing called the Dred Scott cases in the 1850s that said people of African descent can't be citizens in the United States. So they're sitting here free but not citizens. So it's like, what do we do? So Congress comes in and passes the 14th Amendment. Now, there were a whole bunch of different things with this. A lot of people, or some of the early drafts of the 14th Amendment were just about citizenship. However, what that would do then is, there's this little thing called Congress, the people who make our laws, okay? Now, what happens is the number of people you have in the House of Representatives, which is one part of Congress, okay, is determined on your population size. If all these former slaves are now given citizenship, that means the South can now count them towards how many seats they have in Congress. And if they do that, that means they could potentially have more seats than the North and start outbalancing the North and start passing laws, you know, that basically put blacks back in slavehood, okay? And this North couldn't have that. That's why they added on, and it's more than just citizenship. It's not just citizenship. It has several other components. Okay, and we're going to get into each one. I'm actually going to save the citizenship part for last. Okay, now the Congress did pass the Civil Rights Act of 1866. They passed that law, which basically did almost the exact same things this did. However, the only thing is they thought, well, if a different Congress gets elected, they could easily throw that law out like that. So they thought an amendment would be a much more stable solution. So let's get into it. The 14th Amendment covers several parts, and I'm only going to really cover the things in Section 1. There's 5 sections. Sections 2, 3, and 4 have a whole bunch of mumbo-jumbo stuff that we don't really need to worry about, because a lot of it really had to do directly with the Civil War, with debts and stuff, and we almost never use those sections today. And then Section 5 just says Congress can enforce this amendment as how they see fit. So we're going to get into Section 1, where all the meat of this amendment is. And it has several parts, okay? The first part we're going to talk about is the due process part. Like I said, I'm going to save the citizenship part for last. So the first part is due process. Now I know what you're thinking, wait a minute, due process, so we already covered that in the 5th Amendment. Yes, if you didn't remember that, that means you weren't paying attention. But if you did remember it, good job. So, due process, which basically means like you can't have anything taken away until you've been proven guilty in court. That's an oversimplified version. But basically, due process in the 14th Amendment applies to the states. Remember, at this time in history, in 1868, the Bill of Rights did not apply to the states yet. The 14th Amendment, that due process applied to the states. The 5th Amendment, that due process applied to the federal government, okay? Gets kind of tricky, but remember, we have states, we have federal, we have 2 types of government. The 14th applies to the states. The 14th Amendment's due process is also what would make the Bill of Rights, those other 10 amendments, apply to the states as well. Most of the other 10 amendments, not all of them, okay? So the first part is due process, and it's basically straightforward. It's basically the 5th Amendment, but for the states. That's basically what it is. It's almost worded the exact same as well. And it is the reason the Bill of Rights is incorporated or applies to the states. One of the most recent uses of this actually was the privilege and immunity section, which is another section of the 14th Amendment. We had this thing called privileges and immunities, which basically means your rights. That's basically that's an oversimplified version of saying your rights as a U.S. citizen. It's in Article 4 of the Constitution, but they put it in here again. And the most recent time this was used was actually in the McDonald v. Chicago case back in 2010. We learned about this in the Second Amendment, and it was a further adaptation of the 14th Amendment, applying the Bill of Rights, the first 10 amendments, to the states. Okay, so you can kind of see the 14th Amendment is kind of a big deal, and we haven't even gotten through half of it yet. Okay, so the 14th Amendment so far is due process and privileges and immunities, which basically are your rights as citizens not being infringed upon. That's basically what the 14th has covered so far. The next thing, and this is probably the most crucial part of the 14th Amendment for the former slaves that are now free during the 1860s, 1870s, and that was the Equal Protection Clause. Okay? Equal protection, this is a major deal today because the Equal Protection Clause basically said if two people are charged with a crime under the same situations, they need to be punished the same way. Now, did southern states actually follow this? No. If a black person committed a crime and a white person committed the same crime, the black person was usually going to get a punishment 3, 4, 10 times worse. Okay? That was usually how it was in the South. Today, not so much. It's pretty even today. Some people would argue that, but the facts are it's pretty even today. So the 14th Amendment has the Equal Protection Clause, which means, like I said, you commit a crime, the same crime as someone else, you have to get very similar punishments. You can't have crazy different punishments because of the equal protection. Now, one sidebar on this is the equal protection says under jurisdiction of your state. In Plyer v. Doe in 1982, the Supreme Court said that jurisdiction clause, or that part where it says jurisdiction, includes illegal aliens as well. So if someone is here illegally, they still have equal protection under the 14th Amendment because it says persons, not citizens, it says persons, and it says under your jurisdiction. So if a state has jurisdiction over that area, or the United States has jurisdiction over that area, even illegals, okay, regardless of, any alien who, whether you come here legally or illegally, has to be allowed equal protection under the law. Now, that doesn't mean they're given the right to vote and stuff like that, but if they commit a crime, you can't treat them less because they're an illegal or because they're an alien in general. They also have the 14th Amendment's Equal Protection Clause protecting them. All right? Now, one sidebar with that, kind of going back in time. So we had this thing called Plessy versus Ferguson in 1896. Kind of a big deal in American history. It basically set up the whole separate but equal. Okay? The Supreme Court said that as long as facilities are equal, you can separate them. And what that means is the South, they grabbed this and ran with it. It allowed them to have separate schools. This is where we get the whole black restrooms, white restrooms, or colored toilets, white toilets, colored entrances, white entrances. That's where this comes in. And the Supreme Court said as long as it's equal, it's legal under the 14th Amendment. Now, was it always equal? It almost never was. And then in 1954, we have Brown versus Board of Education that ends that separate but equal and resegregates everything. Okay? Now, if it's private situations like a privately owned business, that's where it gets a little different. Now, one final thing before we get into the citizenship part of this amendment. We have state actors. The 14th Amendment it applies to government, state and federal. Well, mainly the state, but it applies some federal things as well. It does not apply to individual or private situations unless that individual is acting on behalf of the state. So if you have someone who is a health clerk or whatever they're called, acting on behalf of the state, the state government gives them their authority, then it counts even though they're a private person. Otherwise, the 14th Amendment only applies to government. It doesn't apply to private things. The very last thing is citizenship. Now, citizenship in the United States under the 14th Amendment says if you're born here, you're a citizen, period. Does not matter who your parents are, does not matter, where your parents come from, your ancestry. If you are born in the United States, you are a citizen of the United States, which is actually a really rare thing. Other than America, so North and South America, the rest of the world does not have this principle of what is called birthright citizenship. almost every other country on earth outside of the Americas, so North and South, you have to have a parent who is a citizen of that country. You have to be, there's all different scenarios. In America, the Americas, North and South America, so Canada, Brazil, Venezuela, Mexico, those areas, if you're born in that country, you're a citizen. Now, this has become a major issue, especially in recent years, because a lot of people feel that there's these things called anchor babies. Okay? Several people feel that illegal immigrants come to America, have their children here, their child is then a U.S. citizen, and then the parent is like, well, are you really going to separate me from my kid? And then the parent gets to stay here with the child. Okay? Now, this isn't a major a major prevalent, issue that's happening all the time, but it is something that's happening. And it's even gotten to the point where some lawmakers have considered repealing the 14th Amendment or changing the citizenship part. Okay? Now, like I said, it's not like this is going to happen tomorrow, but these are issues that are being talked about on Capitol Hill, which is Washington, D.C. And that is a major issue that is occurring today. So, ladies and gentlemen, I know I went over, but the 14th Amendment is literally one of the most important amendments in the Constitution. It is actually the most referenced amendment in any Supreme Court cases out there as well, because of how substantial it is, especially in today's society with all the issues going on with illegals, immigration, and just immigration in general. So that's the 14th Amendment, ladies and gentlemen. The next one is the 15th, learning the right or getting the right to vote. Okay, unless you're a woman, that doesn't come until the 19th Amendment. So as always, stay beautiful, Americans, and peace.